Welcome to the Shabbat Channel, a taste of CSAIR in your inbox. We wish that we could be with you in person, but for now we think this is the next best thing. So check out this week's episode for music from an amazing artist and Torah from our own CSAIR community. For now, you'll have to supply the Kiddush. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, CSAIR. My name is Ben Freed. I'm the Gladstein Fellow and Rabbinic Intern, and it's so great to be back with you again for this week's Shabbat Channel. This week is a special Shabbat. Shabbat Zachor is always the Shabbat right before Purim. It's called Shabbat Zachor, in Hebrew the Shabbat of Remembering, because we have the responsibility, we are commanded, this week especially, to remember Amalek, the tribe that attacked the Israelites as they made their way through the desert. This commandment is so important that on this Shabbat, it's considered an extra obligation to hear the last verses we read from the Torah that include the words, Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek, remember what Amalek did to you, and lo tishkach. Again, it says, don't forget. So what does this mean to remember Amalek? Why is this commandment so emphasized? You have to both remember and not forget. Why so much emphasis on this ancient tribe in the desert that once attacked our ancestors? Part of this comes from the way that we were attacked by Amalek. Amalek did not attack from the front, they attacked the rear. They targeted the stranglers, the old, the infirmed. This Shabbat, when we read these commandments, comes every year on the Shabbat right before Purim, because in Jewish history, Amalek is not only that one tribe. We will read about a direct descendant of Amalek next week in the Megillah. Haman, the great villain of the Purim story, it said, comes from Amalek. But to most Jewish thinkers, Amalek is not even merely a genetic inheritance. It is an ideology of hatred. Just as hatred remains in our world, so too do Amalekites. Unfortunately, we know that there are always those willing to cast aside humanity and ethics for their own gain. In Jewish tradition, we see Amalek in Haman, in the Crusades, and in Hitler. As citizens of the world, we have seen Amalek in the genocides of Darfur and Armenia. In our recent past, we have seen Amalek rise in attacks on synagogues in Pittsburgh, in Poway, and on the streets of Charlottesville, Virginia. We as humans also know that we can see and recognize Amalek in attacks on mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, a church in Charleston, South Carolina, and a nightclub in Orlando, Florida. These forces are always with us, seemingly impossible to break free from them. A part of our Jewish journey is to learn how to keep the forces of Amalek at bay, to fight against it. But how do we do that? I believe it's no accident that the very idea of Zachor, of remembering, is tied to Amalek and is prescribed as part of the answer. When we talk in Jewish communities about the Holocaust, one of the most important things that we say is that it's important to liskor, to remember, and lo tishkach, never forget. But what is at stake in that remembrance? That remembrance cannot be the end point. What do we do when we refuse to forget? How do we make sure that these things do not happen again, even as we see terrible things unfold in our world? We're forced to watch as tragedy after tragedy flashes across our screens and in the headlines of our newspapers. Perhaps it's not only about Zachor. Every week as we bring in Shabbat, we sing Lecha Dodi, and in the first verse we sing Shamor v'Zachor b'dibur echad. Shamor, guard or keep, v'Zachor, and remember, b'dibur echad, in one voice. In this case, Zachor is linking us to a different memory, that of Shabbat. And in the case of Shabbat, we are not only commanded to Zachor, to remember, we are also commanded lishmor, to keep, to guard, to protect. The rabbis say in a midrash that these two words were mentioned simultaneously at Sinai, b'dibur echad, meaning in one utterance of God's voice. Jewish tradition gives us multiple venues in addition to Shabbat to perform this idea of shmirah, of sacred guard duty. 1 year ago this week, I performed one kind of shmirah when I sat by the body of a recently deceased member of the Jewish community, reciting Tehillim in the early morning hours. This tradition of shmirah, of guarding, of keeping, of honoring the zikaron, the memory of a person, is an integral part of Jewish practice. 2 years ago this week, I performed a different Shmirah when I stood outside the Islamic Center of NYU before their Jummah prayers to welcome in the worshipers, to do what I could do to make them feel more safe when they felt vulnerable after an attack on a mosque. I remembered in those moments, liskor, what it felt like to go to synagogue for the first time after the massacre at the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh. And I remembered how comforted I was by the presence of Shmirah, of others who were there to protect me. Over the past year, we've seen so many beautiful instances of Shmirah, of sacred protection. Here at CSAIR and at my synagogue in Little Rock, Agudath Achim, members have made sure to call every single person in the shul to check in on them. People have delivered food and other necessities to their neighbors in quarantine, and our incredible medical professionals have worked tirelessly in difficult conditions to defend and protect human life in whatever way they can. On Shabbat Zachor, the Shabbat before Purim, we think about how memory and protection play out when Haman tried to prey on and wipe out the Jewish people. One of the most often noted things about Megillat Esther that we read on Purim is that God's name does not show up in the whole Megillah. In the Talmud, the rabbis play a game where they search for clues about Purim characters in the Torah. For one character, they point to a verse in which God says God will hide God's own face. Haster astir panai. Whose name does that sound like? Haster astir. It reminds us of Queen Esther. When it seems as though God has hidden God's face, we find God in the actions of the people who stand up to evil, in the actions of people who stop Haman, who say no to Amalek, who provide shmirah, who provide protection. The late, great Mr. Rogers once said, when I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. We find God in the people who refuse to listen to hatred, who stand by their friends and neighbors, who volunteer to step in and to provide shmirah, sacred protection. This week on Shabbat Zachor, the Shabbat of Remembrance, let us all commit, liskor, to remember Amalek, to remember the dangers we face both in the past and in our day. And let us also commit to an act of shmirah, to serve as guards, as keepers, as the ones through whom others will be able to perceive God's presence in the world. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, CSAIR. My name is Sivan Arbel, and I'm a vocalist and composer and educator based in New York City. And I'm really, really happy to share some music with you. And what I'm going to share is a song called Shir HaMayim, which means the water song. And the main verse of the Shir HaMayim goes like this. Mayim, Mayim, Havu Mayim, water, water, bring us water. Ki tzamenu mayim, because we're so thirsty for water. Ki tzamenu, because we're thirsty. Mi arvenu, who's gonna save us and bring us something to drink. Mi irvenu mayim, mitnenu mayim, who's gonna bring us water. Now, I feel that this song is so relevant to the past year because if we time travel to the past and we see the Israeli people, the Jewish people, walking in the desert, and they're so thirsty for water, and they're just waiting for someone to save them from their misery. And I find it so relevant as well for today because in this past year, we've all been craving for something, for, first of all, hoping that we're not going to get sick and that no one's going to get this virus that has been going on for quite a while. And wishing that we can, get a hug from our neighbor, or to send our kids off to play without being scared that something's going to happen, and basically hoping that everything is just going to be okay. And I just want to shine a light on that and say that the Israelis and the Jewish people who were craving water, eventually they got their water. And whatever we wish for, it's going to come in the right moment. And until then, we can just enjoy what we have and be grateful for what we have. So, Shir Hamayim.
שמעת איך בנגב ארץ מול שם